What's the biggest lie entrepreneurs believe about scaling, and how is it secretly capping their growth?
One of the things people believe about scaling is it's easy. There's a few businesses that's easier than others, but scaling is never easy. And 2x does not make 10x. Like, you can't just double input and expect double output. To get to 10x, we have to do lots of different things, right? It's not just more leads and more people and more trucks. So, because lots of those things cause ripple effects. And understanding what those ripple effects are is probably, or I should say not understanding what those ripple effects are, is probably the reason most businesses don't scale effectively. We scale up to one thing, and then for whatever reason, we sit here and bounce around at $10 million in revenue. Like, why can we not break through $10 million revenue? The reason is because we didn't understand the ripple effects of the other things that we were doing.
Enter Chad Nikkel. He founded and scaled 11 companies, completed 7 acquisitions, and navigated 4 high-value exits. With a background in engineering from Kansas State University and a deep expertise in marketing, negotiation, business planning, and operations, Chad's track record spans in industries and market cycles.
One of the lessons is, how do you look at your business and what's it going to be like? Some people say, I don't ever want to sell it, I'm going to give it to my kids or whatever, but sort of like think about building that business to operate itself without you at some point. I had a mentor a long time ago tell me if I had a desk in the office as a CEO, the business was worth 20% less. And I was very offended by that because at the time I had a really nice office. He was like, no, it's worth 20% less. He's like, because if I buy your business, I got to replace you and I'm going to spend more than you are. And so that all makes sense. So I think that thing of like, how do I set the business up to sort of run independently and then empower the people? That's a lesson that people, if they learn it early, their life is easier, the business grows better, and the culture is always better.
We are here today because so many entrepreneurs hit a ceiling. They're working harder than ever, but growth feels stuck. Leadership challenges pile up, and the joy they once had in building their business starts to fade. The truth is, every founder dreams of scaling without burnout, building a team that runs like clockwork and creating a business that thrives without them in the middle of every decision. But too often they're trapped in firefighting mode, reacting to problems instead of leading with vision. Enter Chad Nikkel. He founded and scaled 11 companies, completed 7 acquisitions, and navigated 4 high-value exits. With a background in engineering from Kansas State University and a deep expertise in marketing, negotiation, business planning, and operations, Chad's track record spans in industries and market cycles. Today, as Next Level's growth partner and business guide, he helps leaders break through the roadblocks of rapid growth, align their teams, and implement operating systems that actually fit people using them. Before you settle into this episode, ask yourself, are you running a business or is your business running you? Imagine waking up with a clear plan, a leadership team that executes without your constant intervention, and the confidence that your business is growing sustainably. While you finally have the time and energy to enjoy the entrepreneurial journey again, that's what you'll walk away from prepared to build after hearing today's conversation. Chad, welcome to the Built on Purpose podcast.
Max, thanks so much for having me, man. It's so super great to just catch up with you and be here. I really appreciate it. I'm always
Likewise.
that kind of intro right there when they mentioned the Kansas State engineering thing, I sort of forget about that. Like, nothing I do really applies to the engineering I did then, but there it is.
Yeah, so I love that. Speaking of that, I say the same thing about, I had a business degree from Northern Arizona. And granted, I always preface this with, I'm sure it's different now because I'm not talking shit about college and business schools. But it took me until like my last year to realize that these guys, and mostly guys, there were some gals, but guys, these professors that were teaching me how business was done, they were basically living in Flagstaff smoking weed for 20 years before they were teaching me that. And I'm like, these guys haven't really done business. So today, this is what I love about you is like, you've actually done the business and done the work. And then, so like what I want to kind of start out with is, most people think one business is hard and then, so try building 11 like you have. But the real story is the patterns that emerge, once you've done that many times. When you look back at your 11 businesses, what's the biggest pattern of success you saw? And what's the most common mistake you wish you could go back and warn yourself about?
I was thinking about that as you sort of finished that question. One of the things, it's 11 businesses that made a profit, right? There was a handful of others I started and sort of didn't make it to those lines. But I think what I do better now is not sell a business too soon. So really get it organized, get the teams in place, get the, sort of processes in place and go ahead and sit with that. I love startup. I love like figuring a business out, like really helping people, like, I guess, master their market share and really get to that return aspect of it. But when a business is sort of like clipping along, being boring, that's just not who I am as a person, right? So I think the things I learned along the way was, what can you do to sort of stay engaged and kind of keep going and not bail too early, whether it's selling or burning out? let's say, right?
Yeah, let me, this is a question that I always bounce around with entrepreneurs, especially like you that have been involved in so many businesses. But when you think about all of the trade-offs that you've had to, take as being an entrepreneur and going through all these, growing these businesses, was it worth it?
Yeah, I mean, there's probably some things in there that weren't, I mean, you learn along the way. One of the things I did I ran a large roofing company, took it to $50 million in revenue before we sold it. And before the last year or two, I learned this, like, I call it the day of Chad, right? Like Friday, don't call me. Like I go to my favorite sushi place, I play golf, and I sort of like think about what else we can do, like what are the strategies from my perspective as a visionary. It was like that day of Chad sort of was important. And I think that's something that I learned along the way. It's like 60, 70-hour week that entrepreneurs think is necessary is that thing that you can't take back. Those extra hours taken away from your family, away from your kids' soccer games. I talk about this return on life, thing. You need a return on life. It's not money, it's time, it's life, right? You can't ignore that. And that's the thing I think I might have learned along the way in my added gray hairs.
Yeah, no, I get it too. I mean, as I identify as an entrepreneur more than like somebody in my industry, just because when I talk to other entrepreneurs like that, that's kind of me, whether I like it or not. And I think the fun part about being an entrepreneur is like when you have the white space to think, like coming up
Yeah.
with those ideas, and then obviously need the people to execute them. But I love that. I'm taking notes here too because it's a good friendly reminder for me. So when you hear like fail fast tossed around a lot, but rarely do we hear about losing everything and coming back stronger. You've experienced losing it all and rebuilding. What
Yeah.
was the turning point that allowed you to start again, and how did it change the way you approached your next ventures?
And so my first business, I started when I was 15 years old. I lost in bankruptcy, and that, I made a lot of teenage mistakes, as a teenager and also as a young business owner, and ran that essentially 6 years and lost it in bankruptcy. But it was successful for a period of time, but we overspent. We had some legal stuff that just wasn't, backed up from a liability perspective, and ultimately got sued and had to file bankruptcy to get out from underneath it. The learning aspect of that was really hard at a time in my life when I was newly married, young, and all of those things. And sort of having that perspective of, money and credit and all the things that go with that, like really shaped, I think, how I looked at, credit and business later. What the second part of your question was, how do you get up from that? Right. And, frankly, and vulnerably, there was a year or two there where I didn't get up. Like it was a struggle, man. I didn't feel like the man or the entrepreneur that I was. And it took me a bit to sort of come back from that. But then sort of, look at it in the rearview mirror and say that was a learning experience. What do we learn from that? And, and how do we go forward? I've had another hard learning experience sort of similar to that, where I sold a business to private equity, left a 2-second clause in the contract, and they clawed back $6.5 million that I was left uncollected. And I spent about a year beating myself up over that. And I've sold 3 businesses since and never made that mistake again. Right. And I've helped many people transition and sell businesses successfully for nice paydays. And those are learning experiences that you sort of like lean forward.
Yeah. What did your parents do? Like what got you into entrepreneurship? I mean, clearly like starting at 15, there's something that, that most people don't have. I mean, I don't have entrepreneurs in my family, so I didn't quite start that early. I didn't figure out that I want to be an entrepreneur until later. But what was your upbringing like, and like what pushed you to be an entrepreneur and like go through this cycle clearly a lot earlier than most people?
Yeah, this is a whole long story and is definitely a different podcast. But I was raised in the Holdeman Mennonite religion, so it's like a step outside of the Amish. Very, very conservative, hardworking people, but not very entrepreneurial. My father was not entrepreneurial, farmer, that kind of thing. My mother was a homemaker, and I think what that got me to is I want more. Right, I build it on my own. I'm also adopted. That bloodline, maybe gene was different than, essentially the parents that raised me. They're both passed away at this moment, but I don't know if they did a lot for me from an entrepreneurial perspective other than, hey, look, I want more. Right. So, and I see entrepreneurship or business as a way to go out and sort of create that for myself. Right. And, I mean, yeah, it's the great American dream.
What age did you walk away from that life?
I was 22. So it was similar. It was about a year after the bankruptcy, and it just didn't fit. I didn't fit in that church anymore. And, there's a lot of things that just didn't align with me. And, they're great people, but it just wasn't who I was. And it was time to move on. Yeah. So that actually got me to Arizona the first time, moved to Tucson, and, was there for a few years, and here, back and forth Colorado, and here we are back.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. This past summer, we traveled and we were in Pennsylvania and we were taking my daughter. I'll try to keep this short for the listener, but we were taking her to do an experience in every state. And in Pennsylvania, what we chose to do is we literally met an Amish family at their house and had dinner at their dinner table. And the husband was out, like they actually owned like a milk production, like a milk
Yep.
production like farm,
Dairy.
and they had like, I don't know, probably 40, 50 cattle. I mean, this was a really good operation. But I literally got to sit down and ask the wife and the daughter who's they're feeding us to every question you'd ever have, like curiosity about the Amish life.
Yep.
And it actually made sense to me. Like they at least, different religions, obviously, but it made sense to me on like kind of the simplicity of kind of what they believe. And then their son had a truck. And I was like, what's up with your son drives a truck? Like, you guys drive a horse and buggy, your son drives a truck. And they were just like, yeah, we're hoping he gets over that and, kind of comes back into like whatever. But I don't know. Anyway, I remember this because I've known you and kind of know more of the story. But I got it was just a whole learning, curve and learning experience for me. And there's something I had this deep respect for, the simply of like why they liked that life, and like they still were entrepreneurs and still doing their thing, at least, different time and place in Pennsylvania. But
Yep.
talk about, so like the other thing that we hear, and that we've kind of started to talk about this a little bit, but entrepreneur books and like where I went to college, what I was trying to, convey with the education I got was like they teach in a way that's like a highlight reel.
Yep.
And I think you've like these 11 different businesses. You've lived more of the like the blooper reel too, but share another painful mistake. I mean, that clawback obviously is one. Can you share another painful mistake that cost you the most, and walk us through the exact playbook for how another entrepreneur could avoid making it?
Yeah, I don't know. Nothing like pops to my mind exactly right there, but I will say a lot of stuff comes around hiring, and I see this with other entrepreneurs as well. It's like making mistakes of hiring in a way that is, too much gut feel. Like, hey, I like the guy, like they interview well, or, I like that person, right? And so I know I made a mistake, years ago with a general manager, again, an operating company that was significant from revenue, and general manager turned out to be, causing a sexual harassment suit in the company, and, stuff that we had to deal with that if we would have caught earlier in the hiring process, we could have avoided that. So I think from my aspect, one of the five things that we sort of fundamentals that, we teach as business guides and coaches is the people aspect of your business is so important. So, and that's lots of things. It's hiring, it's how they're coached, it's accountability talks. And we talk about A players a lot, right? And I think that sort of experience of hiring the wrong person that cost me lots and lots of money, and probably good employees quit because of that person, it was a learning experience that I was far more, the hiring fundamentals were far better after that in my businesses. And other companies that I deal with now, that's a core aspect of it. We got lots of other things we work on, but if we don't get our hiring process and our people right, nothing else really matters.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. And the other thing that I always come back to, because obviously we're always talking to people when they're pretty vulnerable, as far as like they're either here to hire somebody to replace somebody, or they had somebody leave, or they had somebody let go.
Yeah.
And, there's a statement that I find myself saying all the time, because people come to me and they're like, I just hired this guy, gal, and, I'm 120 days in or 90 days in, and I'm not seeing it. And the reality is like, you're going to get the best a person will ever give you in the first 90 days.
Yep.
People can argue that all the time, unless it's some weird situation where like they have a death in the family, or there's like something that they have to tend to that's pulling their attention and their time. They don't have the capacity to run a business. But like that simple fact, when I talk to people and I'm like, unfortunately, that's the best you're going to see from this person. And then that's when the light bulb goes off. It's like, shit, we've got to do something. And
Yep.
by the way, one thing I do want to kind of point out to listeners, obviously, Michael Erath has also been on this show. The Five Obsessions of Elite Organizations is the book that just came out. Chad Nichols' organization just put out. It's a great read, and it talks a lot. Like one of the chapters is on people. A lot of it, there's a lot of great stuff in there. So I invite you guys to go listen to that. Talk about, there's other questions I have, but now that I've kind of started to go down this path, talk about being a guide and like because I will say this, I will front the question with this, and the information of this is, I've always thought about if I wasn't running a business and if I sold business, what I'd want to do. And I feel like being a guide or being a consultant to like multiple businesses and multiple people is like something that would help me keep me sharp and it would really pull the best out in me to help them. But talk about how you got there and kind of what you're gaining from it and what you're enjoying most.
Yeah, so it's a long path there, but I'll tell you, for years I was mentoring and other people. So I'm NEO, right? I'm actually the chapter president of EO Arizona currently. Been in EO for 10 years, and I was mentoring people along the way and not charging for it, right? So it's sort of acting as a coach in a lot of cases. And one day I had lunch. I had a member take me to lunch and said, "Hey, I'm selling a business, multiple seven figures, and never sold a business before. What do you think?" And I sort of looked it over and I said, "Hey, look, this here clause, go back to the attorney and ask him to remove that. That's going to cost you $1 million." And he literally paid $60 for my lunch, went back and successfully negotiated that out and, saved him $1 million. So I sort of had this like light bulb moment that I have 35 years of entrepreneurial experience and a lot of pains and scars and things along the way. And I can bring a lot of that, the other framework that we coach on. It's an experience that just kind of comes out with the person I'm coaching and sort of bring that, full circle. I had a call today with a CEO, a company that I coach in Canada. And, the guy is in his mid 60s. And we had a real vulnerable leadership talk today after I've talked to some of his leadership team. And he had a couple of eye-opening moments, like, wow, I didn't know that. And he really had that this sort of shift in his mindset. And that to me, that finding something in a company to help them get to the next level, finding something in a leader to help them get to the next level, that's where it's at. It doesn't matter about the money. What I don't like is acquiring customers. I love coaching. You close the door in the coaching room, you get one-on-one with somebody, the clock goes away, the time doesn't matter. For me, it's just like digging in, helping somebody out and get to that next level is very, very fulfilling for me.
I love that. I've had a coach, the same coach for, gosh, it's probably been 10 years. Before that, I worked with him. He consulted with me. I think I actually placed him in an opportunity as the president. But when he found his niche, named Sheldon Harris, actually was CEO International, I came back around. We didn't see each other for a couple of years. And then he's in Miami. And I talked to him about coaching and just kind of, had him kind of sell me on coaching and then or consulting in this realm. And he said this, and you should definitely say this. He said, whatever the arrangement was, let's call it, was $5,000 a month. He said, "Max, I'll be the cheapest at $60,000 a year. I'll be the cheapest business partner you ever had,
Yeah.
period." And I was just like, wow, like he's so right. Because the stuff that you're talking about and the strategy and the take this clause out from that only comes from experience. You only get that if you have a partner on your team that understands that,
Yeah.
or if you're paying a coach that cares as much about your successes, as you do. So yeah, for sure. If you guys are looking for a coach, Chad is probably your guy, and we'll talk more about that.
Yeah.
Uh, People think success in one industry. A lot of people feel like they've got the magic formula, but you've proven that adaptability matters more. How did you move between industries, sharpening your ability to grow and sell businesses? Like, what's the transferable skill that most entrepreneurs overlook?
So out of 11 businesses, 7 of those were home servicey type businesses, right? Roofing, pools, things like that, right? So, but there was 5 others, software, logistics, some other things, right? So there's a lot of different correlations that work across all kinds of businesses. But I will say that I really speak of home service construction type businesses, partially because I might cuss a little bit in the room. I don't want to hold my tongue, right? It's not who I am, right? My authentic self is, let's get into the mud and let's figure this out. Let's get into the weeds and let's get a solution, right? And the other reason for that sort of vertical for me is that I really believe that the core boring businesses in America are really economically inelastic, and there's lots of opportunity in these boring businesses. Now, to answer the question of what crosses over and what I do well, I think one of the things I do really, really well is sort of front end of business, right? How are we going to go from 5 million to 15 million in the next 3 years? And sort of figuring out the formulas and getting the front end of that customer acquisition cycle shortened, better and higher percentages, and then sort of taking that into the operations realm of the business and sort of refining how that works. So no business scales without the choke points being released, right? And you probably know this more than anyone. Without that good second in command person, a business will only get to a certain level, right? And even at that level, sometimes that second in command outgrows that position, right? So those helping people sort of release those checkpoints and find ways to sort of work through that is something that I'm really good at. And I've done that successfully. Full service business, $0 to $10 million in 6.5 years in an industry that's really a $125 widget. That does not happen without removing those choke points and sort of setting up the leadership team for success, and then living that every single day.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's interesting the types of companies that you've been able to scale. It's pretty remarkable. Specifically in the home services, hiring is probably always a challenge because
100%.
you're always short labor. How did you like? Was there stuff that you did specifically as it related to home services? Because quite honestly, I continue to use the service, and hopefully, I'm not bad talking like old companies, but the service level kind of took a little bit of a dip. We'll just like that way. You know, it was a little while after you sold the business. But talk about how when you were there, like at that business, the pool cleaning business at that time, how did you continue to hire the right people in those tech jobs?
Yeah, so private equity has a way of turning things into numbers, unfortunately. Yeah, I see the trucks driving around today, it drives me crazy. I just want to go buy them new wraps. But yeah, so not to divert too far. So one of the things, that particular business, best job in the world for a pool technician in November, absolute worst job in the world in Arizona in June and July. There's not, besides being maybe an HVAC, there's very few jobs in Arizona that are worse than that in the summer. So we sort of went to this thought of like, what does a technician want? Like, what makes a technician happy in their role? And not coming to the office to say hi to the superintendent, that probably isn't it, right? So the pool guy has this sort of like realm or world that they like to live in, and we develop the routes and that around them. What was happening before in the industry is pool guys were paid a certain amount of dollars per pool stop or dollars per hour. And they were expected to run 100 of these stops in a week and, just blow and go kind of thing. Right. And one of the things that I realized was most of these guys are in their early to mid 20s, and they actually want flexibility. So they want flexibility. They want money. Don't get me wrong, money is a good motivator, but they also want flexibility. So we went to more of a route-based pay and essentially let the technician make that selection. It's like, hey, here's our 5 routes, and this is how they pay. And you don't have to take the lowest route, and you don't have to take the top route. And in fact, we're not going to give you the top route until you prove that you're a really, really good technician. And a lot of times people would come in and they'd never heard that before. Their bosses always said, I need you to 100 pools. I need you to get in that truck. You need to be in it at 6 a.m. and you need to get all these pools done by 2 p.m. instead of having the opportunity to say, hey, you know what? I want to be off on Friday by 10 a.m. because I help my buddy 10 bar on the weekends, right? And so that sort of flexibility allowed us to hire technicians that actually wanted to be in that role and wanted the fit of that job. And it built that culture around the technician. And it allowed us then to back in the culture of the customer experience, and how, that company was very focused on chemistry. Like water chemistry was key. We did a lot of very high-end pools where water chemistry was the most important thing. Clear water doesn't make a safe pool. So that aspect got us good technicians. So I think in other businesses, the way I sort of sell that is, what are the things we're dealing with from the employee's perspective? And what are the things that we're trying to shove down their throat? Because nobody's going to stay for a long period of time and build to a good, employee if you're trying to shove something down their throat.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. And you made comment about hiring a good second in command. We do a lot of that. I think that one of the things nobody wants to talk about when it comes to second in commands is that what we have found, and I'm sure you've seen this, that's why I'm kind of bringing it up. But the reality is like everybody wants to believe that they're going to hire somebody that's going to be with them forever. And
Yeah.
I think this is a lot of roles, but specifically when we talk about second in commands, what we have seen is, first of all, when we interview second in commands, we love when a second in command knows their sweet spot. Like they know that depending on the complexity of the business, but let's just start with revenue, they know they're the 10 to $20 million like second in command person. And they know they're very clear. Like when they get past that, of course they could do it, but it's not really, their cup of tea. They like when it's kind of messy and they like building processes and systems. But I think nobody talks about it. But the smart second in commands, I know they do talk about it. They're like, I'm your guy. I'm the 20 to $40 million guy in, software, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting because I think just complexity, how much, all that matters. When you were building your businesses, did you cycle through different people when it came to that role that were great at the startup phase, but not great when you're kind of operating and executing further downstream?
Yeah, for sure. That whole adage of who got you there won't get you there is a very real thing, just based on what you said. Some people have capacity to a certain level, depends on complexity of business, and that's it. Now, one of the ways that I help my clients sort of mitigate that, and something that I did in the past, was we had these regular, what I called alignment at the top meetings. So not your regular weekly tactical or whatever you might call that sort of weekly meeting with the leadership team, but this meeting where the president, depending on how your leadership structure is set up, but let's call it the president and the second in command, sort of just meet and go over, this is what's going on this month. And during that meeting, like there's the encouragement is the aspect of vulnerability. So if the second in command is feeling burned out or, overwhelmed or maybe not on the same page with the visionary, that's the place to talk about it. Not necessarily in the room with the entire leadership team where they might see this as dissension, right? It's like this sort of separate meeting. And I don't want to say it can be informal, but it's not like we're going through a bunch of damn slides, right? This is just a meeting where we're sort of staying on the same page. Massive shift for a lot of people. People don't really think about how important that is. And we get 3-4 months down the road and a visionary is suddenly like, well, what the hell? Why is this, second in command that I'm paying, mid 7 figures or mid 6 figures not doing their job, right? And the aspect is, well, we haven't been listening or talking, on the same page for a while. And then it's too late in a lot of cases.
Yeah. I feel like the piece of advice, and for people that listen to this and probably watch our content, they're probably numb in the face with this one, but it is like the piece of advice that I give more often than anything else. And because when we hire the right person, at that point, you got the right leader teamed up with the CEO. As long as the CEO and that person see that how the person's doing in their role the same, then things stay good. When things start to get wobbly is when the CEO doesn't have, and the second in command, they don't have the conversation where the second in command is telling the CEO how they're doing in their role. And the conversation that the CEO needs to have on a regular basis is to the COO is on a scale of 1 to 10, how do you think you're doing in your role? And then whatever they say, what's in the gap? And then they can say, are you open to my feedback? But I kind of feel like people hire COOs to run their business. In order to allow them to run their business, the only thing they need to check on is to make sure that that person sees themselves performing in their role the same as they do. As
Yep.
long as that's, as long as it's the same. I mean, obviously, it's not completely bulletproof, but it's pretty bulletproof if you're having that conversation. Because I think a lot of business owners and managers are really busy and they want to have these conversations, and they maybe there's somebody that's not doing things the way they want, and they're like, I need to talk to them about this. But I feel like the quickest way to get through that is just to ask that question on a regular basis on a scale of 1 to 10. How do you think you're doing in your role? What's in the gap? And then address what's in the gap and make sure that it's the same. So a lot of entrepreneurs, and that's where kind of you and I, have connected, and we have a lot of common friends and EO and YPO. A lot of entrepreneurs wear firefighting as like a badge of honor, and they don't realize like they're kind of stuck in this. Why do you think so many founders get stuck in firefighting mode? And what's the first tactical step they could take to step out of it?
Well, a couple things. A lot of times people are stuck in firefighting because they don't want to let go, right? They're like, nobody can do it as good as I can, right? And that turns into their team sort of letting them fight the fire as opposed to their team saying, let me take that off your plate, right? I've got a client just like this right now. The CTO is, doesn't want to delegate, has a very good team below him, and is struggling to delegate because he feels he's the smartest guy and he should be, doing those tasks. And it's a large growing company, global company, right? So that aspect of the owner feeling like somebody else can't do it as well as them sort of comes back to like growing your team around you. Remember, good leaders make, or I should say, great leaders make good leaders. So that's really important aspect. It's like your job as a leader is to make other good leaders, not do their roles or not choke off or micromanage them. It's to make good leaders. One of the ways to do that, we talk about MCOs, most critical outcomes, and obsessions for a role. If you get your team and you make sure there's a most critical outcome for every single role that's on that team and some obsessions, we like to keep them to 5 or so per seat. So you got 5 obsessions that seat thinks about. That, and you talk about going back on that question of, how do you see your role and what are the gaps? Maybe those get adjusted from time to time. But if that person is sort of using that as the guide rail instead of this massive job description, just automatically things sort of work better, right? And the firefighting sort of goes away. Now, one last thing on that I'll say is that this regular cadence of check-ins allows us, you avoid this always and never statements, right? You always do this wrong, or we never get this right. Sales always turns in a bad job. Production never can get it built, things like that. It's like this regular cadence goes back to that previous conversation and not 6 months before. Works in relationships, works in business, right? You go back to the conversation, you don't bring up the old shit, and you stop this sort of firefighting. You get sort of, you realign the ruts, and the track is now straight, and you're sort of on that path of production, as opposed to, just playing whack-a-mole.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you mentioned a really good point about delegation. What's the hardest truth about delegation that nobody talks about? And have you seen leaders finally get over that hurdle? Is it like, I think what you're getting at with the CTO is just sounds like he's bad at delegating and actually letting the process work itself out. But what have you seen that help leaders get over the hurdle of not being able to delegate?
Yeah. So one of the hardest things about delegation is knowing that this person's going to screw shit up, right? So, whoever you're delegating to is not going to do it as on exactly the same way you are. They're probably going to be better in a lot of cases than you are, but they're also not going to be as good in certain things. So they're not going to do it, especially at the start of this, as good as you are, and you have to be okay with that. So when you delegate a process, remember this is not going to be 100 for 100. And we're probably going to be okay with 80% for a while until we sort of get it dialed in, and sort of getting that mindset shift for a leader to be like, hey, look, and not micromanaging it is very important. And then when somebody makes a mistake, instead of it being like, oh man, we screwed that up, right? It's like, okay, yeah, we screwed it up. What are we going to learn from that? So what is the learning process in that mistake, and sort of like building that into the process? If the person that's being delegated to is willing to take ownership, oh man, you know what I mean? Like, that was me. I need to, what could I do better the next time? Now you got somebody that's really worth, working with and building that skill for.
Yeah, 100%. I don't know if you've ever, you know who Dan Martell is, but he wrote a book called Buy Back Your Time. And there's a line in there that he says 100% done by somebody else is 100%, or 80% done by somebody else is 100% awesome. It's
Yeah.
just funny you use those words, like even if it's 80%, but you got now 10 people doing 80% of all these different tasks you used to do, like you're still compounds, that math compounds in your favor.
Yeah, for sure.
So scaling isn't just about like doing more, it's about doing less of the wrong thing. So what's one thing entrepreneurs think about that have them doing things that they should absolutely be hands off, and what's the right way to make the translation to stick, or the transition to stick?
So one of the easiest things about it is value of time. So most people's value of time as a visionary or a CEO or entrepreneur or whatever is very high, hundreds and hundreds of dollars an hour. I would tell you, when I get somebody to do a delegation exercise and say, what are you doing every single, like write down what you're doing all day long. And whatever we think your time is worth, I don't care. Just take the stuff that's $25 an hour or less. And let's start with that, because I will tell, in a lot of cases, it's 50% of the time. That person is spending a huge chunk of their time on tasks that are far below their pay grade. So they should be concentrating on other things and building their leaders. That is a very powerful delegation exercise for people just to think about, and don't think, oh, I'm worth $300 an hour to the company or whatever. Think, what are the $25 an hour tasks that I'm actually doing on a regular basis that is sort of sucking away the time for what I was hired for, or as the entrepreneur, what I'm building this business for? The entrepreneur's goal in building the business is to, build a successful company that fixes some problem in life, and in the same time gives a return on life and provides a solution for clients. Right? So that aspect, the things that take our mind or focus off of that, or don't leave space for that, are all things that we need to think about delegating. So that's a delegation exercise that's pretty easy.
Got it. And then when it comes to like operating systems, obviously,
Yeah.
we're kind of working through some of the principles that you guys teach and coach on. But like most businesses, operating systems, a lot of times they put the system ahead of the leader or the people, which is like, kind of like building a race car before you have a driver. But how is your approach in coaching? How is your approach to operating systems different? And how can you share a real world example of tailoring one to actually fit the leader?
Well, and I would tell you that in almost every case, we're tailoring it, right? So we are not the system that's square peg, square hole. We're going to build it around the business, right? Since I focus a lot of time and energy on home services and construction and sort of those kinds of businesses, almost every single operating system out there, EOS, all these other things off the shelf, the language doesn't always fit, or the timing doesn't always fit, of how those companies act. And we sort of mold the system immediately to sort of fit that company. That is critical in my mind. It's not just about the tool and building the cadence. It's about, what does the company need and what does the leader need? Because if the leader is somebody that's, is more operational focused and less sales focused, but he really needs help in that sort of sales and the front end of the company, the spearhead of the company, then we've got to sort of like build that around that. And quite often it's the opposite of that. It's maybe culture is missing or our hiring practices are wrong. And so we sort of come in and we say, well, this needs to be the first focus. Would you agree? And it's the opposite of what other people have been told, right? They look at another operating system and it says you follow this track period, and they spend 6 months doing something that has no benefit at all to that business. The other aspect that I personally believe and that Next Level Growth personally believes is it's really in the experience. While we have a great operating system and we have ways and tools and things to mold and help you, but there is no guides at Pinnacle, or I should say Pinnacle at Next Level Growth, that have not had a YPO qualifying business or better, right? And my perspective is, while people are good at speaking and maybe even good at instituting tools, wouldn't you rather hire the person that has got the scars, been through the licks, and actually built a business to 25, 50, $100 million? Because there's aspects along the way that are all different. And that I think is a important aspect to think about when you think about a coach.
Yeah, 100%. From your personal experience and from like everything you teach and coach on, which I'm sure are very aligned, but just kind of setting the tone, how do you think of hiring and aligning people on values, like aligning the leadership and the team? Like, how do you guys think about aligning them on values? There's any like tactical things that you guys share or that you would say has worked for you in the past?
Yeah, so we have a couple of different tools that we do for core values, but I'll tell you that my core idea on that, like my first discussion when it comes to values of a company, and we do this early in base camp. This is a very early discussion. Is the good parent, the good parent idea, right? Don't ever tell somebody to do something because I said so. If you tell your kid, hey, don't do that, and they say why, and you say, well, because I said so, that might work 1 or 2 times, but it's not going to work long term. If you say, hey, don't jump off that thing because, this is what potentially could happen, and you sort of explain that aspect, the kid sort of gets the reason, right? And it sets that tone. But then the other aspect I say is, when we start talking about core values, is if nobody on the leadership team, if there's somebody on the leadership team that's not going to live them, then why do we have it? It doesn't mean it's good or bad, but if you have this core value that isn't if you're not walking the walk on a leadership team, then take that damn thing off of there. It shouldn't be on there. We only have core values that we as a leadership team that essentially run this company every single day are willing to 100% be behind. And none of this quality bullshit, right? I tell contracting companies this all the time. They're like, we do quality work. Well, that's not a core value. Like I wouldn't hire you. Nobody would hire you if you said you didn't do quality work. We assume you do quality work. That's made bed. You check into a hotel, you assume the bed's made. You check into a room, the bed's not made. Come on, right? So quality work is not a fucking core value.
Yeah, yeah, I love the made bed. One time, speaking of made beds, is just like a comment. I show up to play golf, and the head pro at Arizona Country Club, I like my shirt was untucked, like I was like kind of in a hurry, and he told me I look like an unmade bed. I mean, I'm friends with him, so he's kind of poking, but I
Yeah.
love that terminology of unmade beds. But no,
Yeah.
that is true when it comes to values. Our values start at the top, 100%. So the other thing that a lot of people talk about, or I think what they get wrong, and clearly you've gotten it right, especially visionaries too. I mean, sure, you're, combo of visionary and you've got some good operational background and how you've executed and built these businesses and sold them. But talk about how important accountability is. And then what's one thing leaders unintentionally do that erodes accountability, and how can they fix it immediately?
Yeah, that's a hard question. I mean, accountability is critical, right? But it's got to be accountability to the person first before the team, right? What is my accountability in my role, right? So for instance, if I'm second in command, I'm accountable for lots of different things. But what is my accountability to myself and then to the leadership team? So that's really, it's a critical thing. As a coach, I use accountability in the aspect of, you're sort of hiring me for some of that, right? Part of the reason you hire me is because I'm helping you see the peripherals. I'm helping you see these outside edges, right? I use the boxer analogy. He comes back, the bell rings, the trainer's wiping his brow, and he's dragging his toe before he throws that left hook. Boxer doesn't see that. He's just trying not to get killed out there. And so now he goes back out there, he sees it, he ducks, and he throws the right hook and knocks him out, right? That's the action that an accountability person sort of brings to this, like what you might not see. But the other aspect is sort of calling you on your shit, right? Like, hey, look, we talked about this for the last 6 months. Are we going to do it or are we not? Right? And when it comes to the leadership team, that accountability sort of happens around the table. right? You're in the meeting, you're having these conversations, but those meetings need to be vulnerable enough that there's radical candor being used. So we're not just, there's an elephant in the room we're not talking about. We've got to be able to have that accountability around the leadership team table. Otherwise, it's a waste of everybody's time.
Yeah, 100%. And then when it comes to scaling, I think every entrepreneur, and you've run into it all, especially as a coach and what you're doing now in the businesses that you've scaled and grown, scaled and sold. Every entrepreneur, I think, has a lie they're kind of telling themselves. What's the biggest lie entrepreneurs believe about scaling, and how is it secretly capping their growth?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things people believe about scaling is it's easy. There's a few businesses that's easier than others, but scaling is never easy. And 2x does not make 10x. Like, you can't just double input and expect double output. To get to 10x, we have to do lots of different things, right? It's not just more leads and more people and more trucks, right? So because lots of those things cause ripple effects, and understanding what those ripple effects are is probably or I should say, not understanding what those ripple effects are is probably the reason most businesses don't scale effectively. We scale it to one thing, and then for whatever reason, we sit here and bounce around at $10 million in revenue. Like, why can we not break through $10 million revenue? The reason is because we didn't understand the ripple effects of the other things that we were doing. So if you just add more customers and more marketing and more opportunities, but we're not actually, we're no longer completing these on a quality level, but the ripple effects of that is going to sort of stop that. It's just the natural order of things. That, I think, is the biggest issue with scaling. A lot of times is not understanding what those ripple effects are as you go.
Got it. And then you talk about a single question leaders should ask themselves every morning. What is it, and why does it work?
Well, I don't have time to think about this, but the thing that came to my mind immediately when you said that is the return on life worth it? Like, what am I doing in my business every single day? What am I missing? And is that return on life worth it? Because we're all going to die one day. And in the end, along the way, entrepreneurs like you and I have done a lot of different things, right? And my goal, and what I try and help people all the time, is that return on life is worth it. We get the value out of that. We experience things in life that are awesome, that fill us. And it's not just about 75-hour weeks. That return on life has got to be worth it. And if you look in the mirror and say, this current return on life isn't worth it, first of all, call me and see if I can help you fix it. But you got to make some decisions.
Yeah, I was this morning, I had my first time to start thinking about my YPO graduation speech, which I graduated this year, but my speech is until I think April. So I'm trying to think of a theme. To me, I want to talk about like what I've learned from YPO, because it's the audience, and like I've learned so much. You've learned so much from EO, same thing. I mean, to me, EO, YPO to me are the same, because I have a forum, everything's for me the same. And I think that was so far, we'll see how it turns out, but that is the theme, is like me getting clear on designing a life that I'm enjoying way more than being reactive. And when I look back, starting from like maybe COVID on, but even earlier than that, like my summers are different. The way I spend time, how I spend time, how I work, when I work, like who I work with, like all those things have changed so much, because we all ask that question. Some point you have some success and you're like, what am I doing this for? You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So I think that is an incredible question, for leaders to ask. What do you, when you, so you've obviously been working with some companies, what do you see in the market? Like any trends that you see just across the board, and, small to mid cap companies, and you could be working with some bigger companies too, but any trends from you that you see just in general, from market conditions, from challenges people are having that are similar? Are there any trends that you're seeing?
Right now, a couple of trends. It seems like the customer is being much more selective. So there's less overall, I think, opportunities when it comes to, customers are much more selective of how they're buying things. And then a second thing is probably around employees. So employees, as the generations change, the employees are, and I'm talking now sort of in home services or blue collar type businesses, there's sort of this turnaround aspect where some of these jobs are paying a lot of money. There's plumbers out of there out of high school making 100 grand a year. I mean, my son's starting medical school here in a week, and there's plumbers who are going to make more than he is. That's the reality, right? So there's a sort of this shift, I think, of there being more available skilled staff for blue collar companies than there was in the past. But right now, in the current economic conditions, a lot of it is customers are hanging on to their money.
Yeah, yeah, I think I see that too. What about from your standpoint and coaching and even home services? what effects have you seen from AI and just technology that's happening,
Yeah.
like, just as a trend? I mean, I think it's, everybody knows that there's definitely some efficiencies, but what is your take on it? And like, how do you think entrepreneurs should be thinking about AI and technology and like, especially in like, call it home services and maybe more blue collar areas?
Yeah. Well, I mean, AI, you should have been working on this a year and a half ago. If you're not using it today, your competition is way ahead of you, right? So there's lots of different opportunities for that, even in, more blue collar businesses. It's adding efficiencies along the way. For let's just take a plumbing company, for instance. It's adding a lot of efficiencies in customer acquisition and all of these other things. It's not replacing the aspects of fix my toilet, that kind of thing. It's not going to replace those kinds of things as far as I know, right? There's many more industries that it's a much bigger deal, than those industries. But the reality of it is, lots of the things that we used to require people to think for, AI can do that thinking for us and become more efficient, clear cut, and do it better. So it doesn't matter what your business is, you've got to find a way to use AI because it's here, and if you're not using it, somebody else is.
Yeah, 100%. And what about just hiring? Obviously, that's near and dear to our heart. And I kind of feel like, in knowing you from the past, something that you were always good at. And we talked about how you thought about technicians. And I think that's, a way more forward thinking approach than most people like look at kind of labor driven positions to think about like, what do they want? I mean, I think that,
Yeah.
in everything we've talked about, it's one of the things that's standing out to me just in general when I work with some clients now is like, that, was probably a huge differentiator. It's probably also what the private equity group kind of abandoned when you left. What do you so when it comes to hiring now, talk about, what you've seen work, things that, maybe they're questions, maybe they're, things you talk to your clients about. Like, talk about how important hiring is, like what you think works, and, just anything in general from a hiring trend.
Well, I think some of the new things, first of all, I think personality profiling, or whatever we're calling that aspect of it, culture index, adaptive index, those kinds of things are really helpful in a lot of ways when it comes to hiring and managing people. What I'm seeing is a trend in some of those tools, we're using more conversational AI back and forth. Like, I've got, Joey sitting in front of me, and this is, what his profile is. How is he going to work with Billy over here? And this is what his profile is. And it's sort of, you don't have to discern or understand it quite as much as we used to, because AI will sort of build that for us. I think that's a massive advantage when it comes to hiring, from a perspective of understanding who's in front of us and how we're going to manage them in the future. I think there's a little bit of a concern. I have a little bit of concern that AI is doing so much of this kind of yes or no kind of stuff, where we might be missing an employee that we could take. They might not be a plus player to begin with, but we could hire them at a B plus and get them to an A player pretty quickly. That's probably something that I see as a little bit of a negative with it. It's like,
Yeah. I think what blows my mind of AI, if people, if they're not using it regularly, like, it always blows my mind if I take a transcript from a conversation and literally ask AI, what was assumed but not talked about in this conversation? Like, the stuff it can critically think about is all stuff that you would think about. But like, if you and I, even in this conversation, like, what did we miss? Like, what did we not talk about? The stuff, how quickly it comes out. I mean, maybe 20% of it you throw out, but like 80% of it's like dead nuts on, and it can
yeah,
critically think really fast, which is absolutely amazing. And I do think, to highlight what you said, just illuminate it even more, I am blown away on how good AI is with predicting personality assessments and predicting kind of like where the gaps are, and like that critical thinking of like, hey, if these two people are going to work together, or what are we not thinking about? Like, this person seems to be a fit in all these areas. What else is there? And like, I like blows my mind. I've kind of said this a couple times, but I put it on the record is I kind of feel like these hiring assessments companies, they're in big trouble.
yeah,
Because if you ask AI, like, you say, hey, here's my disc and motivators and behaviors, tell me what my Colby is. Even though they're different, it'll get you like close to it. It'll get you so close to it that like it doesn't even make sense to, in my opinion, to even pay for all the assessments. Because if you can get it to predict one, and then to your point, you can say, hey, here's my Colby score. What would be the right Colby score, to complement me in like these areas for this role? It spits that out in like no time. I mean, so to me, it's like, I would hate to own an assessment company, because the algorithms that they're using, AI knows everything about it and can spit it out. The only thing it's not doing is ripping off completely the licensing of it. But to me, it is amazing on what AI's, can do, to your point on the hiring assessment side.
100%. 100%. Yep.
So as we start to, kind of wrap up, I just want to ask, like, run through some. This has been amazing, man. I appreciate like everything we've talked about here.
Yeah.
There's a couple like just things that I want to like touch on, little more rapid fire questions, just to kind of get some more information from you. But what's the one lesson you wish every entrepreneur could learn without having to go through the pain you went through? We talked about a couple of them, but what comes to mind?
Yeah, man. That's a hard one. I think one of the lessons is, how do you look at your business and what's it going to be like? Because some people say, I don't ever want to sell it. I'm going to give it to my kids or whatever. But sort of like think about building that business to operate itself without you at some point, right? I had a mentor a long time ago tell me, if I had a desk in the office as the CEO, the business was worth 20% less. And I was very offended by that, because at the time I had a really nice office, right? He was like, no, it's worth 20% less. He's like, because if I buy your business, I got to replace you, and I'm going to spend more than you are, And so that all makes sense. So I think that thing of like, how do I set the business up to sort of run independently and then empower the people? That's a lesson that people, if they learn it early, their life is easier, the business grows better, and the culture is always better.
Yeah, and it's almost like I set you up to say, like, hire the right people to make your business more valuable. But I know it is true. Every time I talk to a lot of entrepreneurs that are kind of stuck and they just don't
Yep.
have the right second in command in place.
Yep.
And they're talking about, hey, I do want to sell my business soon. To your point, the more that CEO the more the business is relying on that CEO, to your point, but the less that business is worth. And so that's, just something that people have to wrap their head around.
Yep.
So if somebody's driving home right now, because there's gonna be a lot of people listening to this, and they're ready to take action, what's the first small tactical move you tell them to take before the day ends?
I would just look at my key people and figure out what's the most critical outcome for each piece. Like, what should this key person really be focused on? And are they focused on that? Because when I ask that question, a lot of times people will say, well, I report to this person and this person and that person, and I've got this whole spider web of things, and we're not being successful. That person should have one critical outcome, and they should be obsessed about completing that in their role. That will shift 8 out of 10 companies out there listening. 100%.
Got it. Love it. Yeah, we built a tool that is based off of our philosophy that is called role visioning and success outcome design, to really get clear on the things that this person needs to achieve, specifically like early on in the first 6 to 12 months. And I kind of went back and forth about using the like one line as the mission critical outcome, like just like as like the mission of the role. This conversation is like pushing me more and more to kind of go down that direction.
Yep.
So I'm gonna finish up with just some rapid fire questions, man. You've been absolutely amazing. I'm glad we were able to reconnect. Look forward to spending more time. So
Yes.
these are just rapid fire questions. Overrated or underrated business plans?
Underrated. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Overrated.
What's one leadership habit that instantly makes you lose respect for somebody?
Not listening, you know?
Which is a lot of entrepreneurs challenges and a lot of A players, A types that challenges.
Yep.
If you could ban one piece of business advice forever, what would it be?
Shit. Ban one piece of business advice forever. Man, that's a hard one, honestly, for me.
It is a general.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I take it back to the operating system, like there's no one thing fits all. No one thing fits all. Yeah.
Got it. First hire every entrepreneur should make, and it's not who you think.
Yeah, first hire every entrepreneur should make is somebody to take the menial tasks off your plate. So in my opinion, that's an assistant.
Yeah, agreed. In fact, when every time somebody calls me and they tell me they need a COO, I'm always like, "You have an EA? Like, what does your EA do?"
Right.
And if they don't, they get offended because I tell them, which is kind of weird because they want me to sell them on hiring them an EA, and I'm like, you're your own EA right now. Like,
Yeah.
all you need to do is hire an EA, and you get that much more, productivity out of the roles.
Yeah.
Well, man, I'll tell you what, any last piece of advice, this has been absolutely amazing. Like every part of this conversation, I really enjoyed. I think the listeners, will enjoy because everything's been sound as far as, there's been a lot of alignment between our philosophies and, yours personally and your companies. But any last word that you have just in general as we close out this conversation?
Yeah, I mean, not really. I mean, I'd love to just have a conversation and continue it with anyone that would like to. Return on life is my philosophy. I travel, I enjoy life, so I want entrepreneurs to get that thing. So that's my last piece of advice. I think is is sort of think about what that means to you. And yeah, I mean, if I can help anybody out, I appreciate Max, appreciate being here. And if there's anybody I can help out, I would love to. I think you're going to put the contact information in the show notes or whatever, but yeah, I'd love to see if I can
Yeah.
help.
What's the best way to get a hold of you?
So on Next Level Growth's website, nextlevelgrowth.com, or my email is just chad@nextlevelgrowth. So CHAD, Chad at Next Level Growth.
It's awesome.